Hey, power people. Welcome to Renewable Rides. I'm Gareth Evans.
And I'm Dan Roberts. We're the founding team of VECKTA, a platform and marketplace streamlining how companies buy on-site energy.
In each episode, we'll uncover the latest trends, challenges, and triumphs relating to the energy transition through the experiences of our team and our inspiring guests.
Our goal is to help companies take action to create a resilient, profitable, sustainable, and thriving energy future.
Let's go. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Renewable Rides. And today we are joined by Allie Detrio, the Chief Strategist at Reimagine Power. And Allie, I've always loved hanging out with you. We met many years ago at a workshop in the Bay Area. And at the time you were with NG, and I loved your attitude, outlook, and very positive but challenging views on the energy market and where we're heading. And so super excited to dig into that today. We always start with, what are you passionate about? So please share.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. No, bring back lots of good memories, both NG back in the day and also reconnecting at RePlus and Solar Power International in Vegas, reconnecting on Microgrids. It's been a fun ride. Really excited to be here with everybody. So thanks for having me, both Gareth and Dan. So I'm Allie Detrio. I'm the Chief Strategist at Reimagine Power. We focus on bridging the gap between policy and market development, project development for microgrids and other distributed energy resources and community energy solutions in the Western states. Really passionate about that, about decentralization, decarbonization, and also about music and sustainability, and just getting outdoors and really enjoying nature. So those are the things that I'm most passionate about and most excited about in my life.
Love that. And how did you end up getting into sustainability and adventure and outdoor life? Like, where did you grow up, and where do you think that love and passion came from?
Interesting question. So I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. I actually grew up playing soccer under massive transmission lines outside of a coal plant, only a mile away from my house. So there must be some subliminal thing of why I eventually landed in clean energy way later on in my career. But I actually went to Arizona State University in Phoenix for college. Originally started out in civil and environmental engineering, kind of loving infrastructure and thinking that was cool and would provide me with a well-paying job. And this is the wake of the recession and everything when I was in school. I was a weed out engineering student, though. I hated Excel spreadsheets and getting up to be at construction sites at 6 a.m. So about 2.5 years into my journey, I found myself switching into ASU's first of its kind in the world, School of Sustainability. My friends that were also weed out engineering students were like, you get to pick your classes. If you join now, you'll be part of the first undergraduate class in the world to get a real bachelor's in sustainability. When I went to SOS 101, they talked about sustainability kind of being a lot more than just green energy and recycling, which was really back in those days, 08, 09, what people thought of sustainability was. And that it was really the interconnectedness of the environment, the economy, and society. And ASU's program, it's since now, it's number one in innovation. The school is number one in innovation for a long time, but used to be that they pulled all the department heads from all the different schools of economics, environmental science, urban development, history, policy, you name it, to teach sustainability of. And so that's how I got a really nice multidisciplinary education from ASU. And 15, 17 years later, now that program is really robust. It has many different tracks and different minors and other certificates you can pursue. But back then it used to be kind of a hodgepodge and they were just figuring it out. So I had the pleasure of going to school during that time when everyone was just figuring out what really is sustainability. And that those three pillars really resonated with me. It's it's not just about the environment. It's not just about society. It's not just about the economy, but the system. And that led me to working in water and power and kind of how I landed in, renewables, moving on to energy services. When I had an opportunity to move to California 11 years ago, I took it so I could be kind of in San Francisco, where I'm based now, in the hub of sustainability, and had the pleasure of working on a lot of different interesting clean energy problems and solutions ever since. And that's what led me into kind of policy and seeing how it really drives business development, market development, influences our projects. And so really fell in love with that. And here I am today. So been a long journey, but it's been a fun ride thus far.
Love it. I'm particularly close with Sun Devils. My wife is a Sun Devil as well, so I think you guys are awesome. Allie, you've become quite the policy expert, and maybe you can share a little bit about Reimagine Power, what you and your team do as it relates to policy and everything DERs.
Yeah, so I'm really fortunate to have a wonderful team at Reimagine Power. So again, we're a boutique consulting firm. Our team's remote first, so I'm based here in San Francisco. I've got my counterpart, Allie Hilliard. She's based in Sacramento. She leads all of our legislative affairs, and I've got different team members around California and even the East Coast supporting various different initiatives on the team. So we've ebbed and flowed a little bit, but right now we're a team of 8. And I'm really proud that we have such a really rock star team of folks that come from all corners of the energy sector. And importantly, we really try to bring up a lot of folks that are either younger or newer to the industry, either from directly out of school through our internship program, or those that are just starting out and are new grads in the space. And so we've had a lot of success with training some of those younger folks, the Gen Z and beyond, to be a part of the team. And so Allie Hilliard, for example, just was promoted to policy manager after starting with our company as an intern back in 2020 in the wake of the pandemic, helping me track bills. In the legislature, one of the key things we focus on is like policy intelligence. So tracking and monitoring what's happening in the legislature. California is one of our biggest markets, but we also work in Colorado, Oregon, Hawaii, and kind of keep a conduit to what's happening at the federal level as well, and wherever our clients might ask us to go. And so legislative affairs, both tracking and monitoring policy, proactively influencing things at the legislature is a big deal for us, and also doing regulatory affairs and monitoring activities at the agencies like the California Public Utilities Commission, California Energy Commission, the other agencies when needed. And so we have a team of analysts that also really help to kind of keep our boots on the ground and monitor all those activities. Even just monitoring all the different policy changes, all the different activities requires the small team and a little army of boots on the ground folks to both like track and see what's happening on the ground, but also then try to engage where it's appropriate, both proactively to influence things and also try to defend against things that could actually make it harder for clean energy projects to come online in the various forms. So that's a little bit more about Reimagine Power. We have a number of folks that are engaged in different aspects of like engaging in the political space, doing marketing and communications, and more of like the overall business strategy. The biggest thing about Reimagine Power is that we're really looking to bridge that gap between policy and then relating it back to our clients' businesses, whether that's their market development activities, their projects specifically, or how they engage with customers. So making it really a win-win, and how we engage really depends on the various client initiatives, but makes everything an interesting job, and no day is boring and like the next.
And Allie, there's a huge amount going on in this space. What is it that you're actively working on right now that's really taking up your time and attention and piques your interest, and that our listeners should be aware of?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'd say one of the big things I'm known for is working on microgrids. And microgrids are a system of different distributed energy resources and loads that are all interconnected together. And what's special about them and kind of unique is they have the ability to work together and be optimized autonomously. And they all interconnect together with physically a single point of interconnection with the macro utility grid. And that at that point, they have the ability to island and disconnect from the larger grid and continue operating, either to provide backup power for customers. Sometimes microgrids island on demand to provide greater like system reliability and other benefits, as well as resiliency benefits to the wider community. And so one of the biggest things I work on is microgrids and community energy resilience policy initiatives. And I've been working on that in 3 main states over the past few years. And I've done actually a lot of work in Hawaii in the past as well. So both California, there was several bills on microgrids this year, as well as an ongoing proceeding at the Public Utilities Commission and a program at the Energy Commission looking at microgrids. Oregon recently, this past year, had a bill that passed that we were very heavily involved with to create county community energy resilience planning funding and really help these local communities like take control and develop these local energy resilience plans. And during that exercise, like look at what are some of the critical and essential facilities that could be outfitted with backup power, or microgrids might serve a critical or community need. And we did some of the same work in Colorado, where we helped with looking at bills that created a microgrids for community energy resilience program, as well as looking at developing a broader electric reliability and resilience roadmap that considers the role of microgrids in that road mapping process. And in Hawaii, which I kind of consider the postcard for the future, we had done a lot of this work in previous years, looking at developing a microgrid services tariff and looking at all the ways that microgrids can both provide resilience, again, in the face of a grid outage or natural disaster. Hawaii and California actually have some similarities, even though they're very different states, and that they both have a lot of grid resilience challenges. And so some of the work that I've done there in the past has really helped kind of like look at these other states, kind of like the postcard from the future, and kind of influencing some of the work we do here today. Another thing that's really interesting with Hawaii that I think is really relevant today is looking kind of at our utility business model. Something that we've had, was created in the 20th century. We had a lot of different goals for the energy system back when we first created the grid, and really looking to provide electricity to customers en masse, versus our 21st century electricity system needs and challenges and opportunities today, where we have safe, reliable, somewhat affordable power today. You could argue in the larger spectrum of things. But we really have a lot of 21st century energy needs that we never considered before, including like resilience, high quality, like highly reliable power, like in the digital age when we're all connected to the internet. Going to have a power outage is not just a matter of inconvenience. It really can be like very economically devastating to a lot of different businesses and entities, to say nothing of the impacts that it can have on like our most vulnerable communities and populations. And so, having someone that has medical needs go without power for even a few hours can be a matter of life and death. And then when you look at the public sector and all the different emergency services, critical and essential services that we have, power is really essential to life. And so going without it for even, a few minutes or an hour can really screw things up a lot. And so I think it's really critical that we look at a lot of these 21st century energy problems and solutions more in that lens, not just looking at it from this status quo where we were just looking to kind of get power to the masses. I think we could say that we've met those 20th century energy challenges, and now we need to look to the 21st century challenges. And that's where I think microgrids and a lot of these community energy solutions can really play a really interesting role in helping to both meet their needs on a like individual or local level, but also help to meet our like system needs with electric grid reliability and like grid resilience and climate adaptation. So yeah, lots of interesting things happening in all the Western states.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit, Allie, about some of the policies that your team is working on specifically to help drive us into this new kind of 21st century grid? Like, I guess there's probably a couple different approaches. There's policies as it relates to the utilities, but then there's also funding opportunities. Maybe break those two and talk a little bit about the policy first, and then if there's time, we can dive into the funding side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say one of the key policies that keeps coming up in a couple of different states now is this concept of being able to share power between multiple properties or multiple customers or across rights of way. Traditionally, with the utility rules that were written, again, in the 20th century, oftentimes are like almost 100 years old or at least 70 years old, during a time when the utility was really the only energy provider. Customers were simply like receiving energy from these large centralized power plants and using them as kind of like passive consumers. That's the energy world that we built our system around, the regulatory paradigm we have today that still exists. Even though now we're moving into a 21st century world where customers want to deploy a lot of their own solutions. They want to partner and like bundle together either as like neighbors or as communities and deploy their own technologies and help, provide their own energy needs or share those with the surrounding community. And also just looking at the two-way flow of power, where we're not just passive energy consumers anymore, where whether you're talking about a single customer or community or other sort of larger aggregation of customers, they want to engage with the energy system more in kind of like a two-way like relationship, rather than just being passive consumers like we think about in like the 50s, the 70s, and beyond. So one thing we've been working on is seeing like, how do we change some of these regulatory and policy barriers to allow for the sharing of power between multiple properties or sites, even if it's a single customer, and then maybe expanding that to a community level where we're looking at siting like new clean energy resources in a community that could provide power to a broader scope than just like your traditional one property, one generator kind of mechanism. So that's one thing we've been working on. California had a couple bills earlier this year looking at that. Oregon as well was looking at this and has highlighted this as one of the barriers to the deployment of broader community energy resilience solutions. So some of these Western states are taking a much closer look at that. And California has a few bills, both that are not moving this year and that are still moving this year, that are kind of looking at this in either a broader lens or looking to tackle this problem kind of like on a one-by-one, case-by-case solutions basis. But ultimately, it shows that there's a need to examine some of these policies, like how do we share power on a community level in greater detail and remove some of these long-standing utility barriers where they're basically saying, if you're providing power to more than one particular meter or customer site, you can't share that beyond anyone else. And I think that really prohibits new projects like microgrids and some of these other innovative solutions from being scaled and deployed more widely, and offering the opportunity to customize these solutions to meet a lot more of these, again, 21st century community energy needs that we just didn't think about in the 20th century. So I think that's really important. And Hawaii was looking at this in great detail. So was Maine, and a couple other states like the District of Columbia also was taking a look at this issue. So that's one. Another one that seems to be really resonating is this idea of community energy resilience. And what does it mean to truly be able to have an adaptation strategy in the face of climate change? How do we mitigate risk of power outages, of natural disasters, and climate change? And so this idea of community energy resilience planning and implementation, we've really seen take off both in California. We had a couple bills earlier in the past 2 years that were working on this. The Energy Commission now implementing a program, to your question, Dan, called the Community Energy Resilience Investment Program, taking money from the federal government through the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act that Biden passed the IRA last year or 2 years ago, and receiving that money and creating a program in concert that would take some state funding to allow us to develop some more of these community energy resilience projects. Some of that framework that was developed a few years ago in California has made its way to Colorado and Oregon and other places, where we've now seen Oregon looking to adopt a similar program, more so at the county level, but now considering how they might do that on a statewide basis with their energy security plan and the Oregon Department of Energy. And then Colorado having multiple programs now where they're looking at the electric reliability and resilience roadmap and how resilience and the microgrids can play a broader role in our energy system planning, as well as a grant program now that's actually open right now through, I think, the 13th it is, to provide funding for local governments, municipal utilities, and cooperatives to explore the planning and implementation of community energy resilience solutions. So those are two of the things that are really top of mind. And I'd say a third one that's really like kind of a more macro issue we're seeing is like this larger question, kind of getting to my point earlier of the utility business model. What is like the legacy business model that we've been working with for the last 100 years? What is kind of this regulatory structure we are working with today? How is it not serving our 21st century energy needs? And what do we need to do to bring that into the 21st century? And so we're looking at like, how does rate design need to evolve with our 21st century energy needs? How do utilities need to design programs and rates that allow for the cost of these kind of clean energy projects to come down? What kind of monetization opportunities do they present themselves? Especially when we look at like a win-win value proposition where like utilities could actually use the benefits that or the grid services that microgrids and other community energy projects might provide to provide system level benefits to the wider like distribution grid. And then like how might like these types of facilities or like sustainability project operators and owners like get some sort of compensation for those services, which allows us to deploy more of these projects at scale and kind of create, again, a larger market for community energy and sustainable energy solutions. So I think one thing that we're looking at is like, the status quo is that, the investor and utilities largely have this regulatory system where they get a 10, 12% interest rate essentially on anything they build and operate as a capital asset, versus they don't really get any sort of profit or any sort of like, they have no motivation to develop or like incentivize customer owned or like community owned clean energy projects. And if we remove some of that like market distortion and bias in our regulatory structure to allow for a lot more of these customer and clean energy projects to happen on the same level playing field, I think we could really like see a lot more deployment of resources that meet our like overall clean energy goals and help meet again our system reliability and like grid services needs that benefit all ratepayers, all taxpayers, like the system as a whole. It's not just a favoritism towards like one customer. That's one of those things that I think is really important that we kind of nip around at the edges in the policy and market development world, but we could really like learn from more other states like Hawaii from diving deep into some of these like legacy regulatory models, legacy utility business models, and see like how do we correct some of these market distortions for the 21st century.
And Allie, do you think, is that the barrier today? I don't think many of our listeners would realize before this conversation that if they've got a massive roof or a car park and they could deploy their own on-site energy system and they don't need all that energy, I don't think most would know that they couldn't sell that over the property line to their neighbor today or transact that energy. And I think in this age of suddenly energy load growth is now skyrocketing and the utilities are already struggling to keep up with current demand, let alone growing demand, you'd expect that this would be embraced as a way of helping them manage the opportunity, defer their own spend. Is it the incumbent business model that is the biggest barrier to that? Or what do you think is kind of holding up progressive policy development?
That's a great question. I think it's multifaceted. I'd say at its core, yeah, like kind of this legacy business model and this fundamental like market distortion where the regulated, vertically integrated monopoly utilities and even ones that are more like decoupled or some sort of competitive marketplace, like in California and elsewhere, they are still incentivized through this legacy business model to invest in large scale transmission, distribution infrastructure and big power plants. And for that infrastructure will take as long as possible to get built and for it to be as expensive as possible, because they make anywhere from, nationwide, it's anywhere from 9 to 12% rate of return on every dollar they spend.
Yeah.
With essentially no cap on that spending, and there's a lot of, I think, regulatory capture, a lot of like I'd say undue influence of the regulatory system where these legacy monopolies, they've had 100 years to be involved in this system. And when you bring in a whole bunch of these 21st century actors, whether you're a more sophisticated clean energy developer, you're an environmental justice organization, other community focused entity, it's just hard to compete with the mountain of money that they have, the ins and outs that they know of the regulatory process, and influence that on I'd say a level playing field. So that's like they'd say the core of it is this legacy business model that continues to transcend in the 21st century, where they do make money based on assets they build rather than performance and delivering the best outcomes they can for customers. And if we were to correct that particular market distortion, it's called performance-based regulation, where you're looking at incentivizing profit motives and revenue motives based on outcomes or performance incentive mechanisms. Hawaii has done a lot of great work on this that I think California and other states can really take from. And some states have done started to embark on the deeper exploration of this. But I think that's at the core of it. And if we remove that bias in the marketplace, let's say utilities didn't make any profit based on how many transmission miles they built. Instead, let's say they made money based on, as you said, Gareth, how many transactions they facilitate in a marketplace, how quickly they interconnected a number of different customer and community clean energy resources. If they made profit based on that, I think our world would look a lot different today in the energy sector. So that's one thing that I think is really core. But there are other things, like there are other regulations, like again, you can't, transact with more than two other customers. You can't transmit power across a right of way, even if you're the same customer, even if you're just going, right across the street. There's a lot of these legacy regulations that are kind of getting into the weeds. We could spend a whole episode just on the over the fence rule and what barriers have presented microgrids in various states. But there's a lot of different things I think that have manifested over time that frankly we didn't know about 20, 30 years ago because the technology wasn't there. We weren't having the type of engagement and demand from customers to get these new solutions off the ground. And that leads back to your other point, which is we can't just have a handful of regulated big utilities doing all of the business of energy anymore. We have a lot of customer demands. We're looking to electrify everything. We have these aggressive decarbonization goals. And we have a system of climate change that is really saying we can't invest as much in this climate risky, vulnerable infrastructure because it's very expensive and it is subject to a lot of disasters. We have to look at decentralizing the energy system and doing that strategically. That doesn't mean deregulating it, but looking at how do we empower more of the public agencies, how we look at empowering local governments and the communities to take control of their energy infrastructure and build, own, and optimize the resources that are going to meet not only their community's needs, but again, benefit the whole system. And that's where I think the distribution utility and kind of these macro, bigger businesses can play a larger role in helping to optimize the system. And then transacting and engaging with all of the communities and customers to help facilitate the outcomes that we want to see in the system, namely clean energy, resilience, reliability, more affordable power. And looking at a 21st century energy system versus kind of trying to hold on to everything we've had from the 20th century just because it happened to work then. We're not in the 1950s anymore. And so I do think it's really important for us to look at what were our 20th century energy goals and solutions. I think we can say, yeah, check mark. We've really won on that and have power to the masses. But what we really need to look at is some of these 21st century energy goals and needs and how do we solve those challenges. It requires a much broader marketplace. It requires a much broader set of solutions. And how do we empower that? And that's where the policy and regulatory aspect really comes into play. And I think is really important to driving some of those business and project outcomes we're all looking to see.
Yeah, it's these investor-owned utilities and the policies of the past have kind of gotten them fat and happy, and there's very little motivation for them to change and get into the 21st century, which can be frustrating for business leaders that are trying to adapt their businesses and as I've said in the past, they're getting a more expensive product that's the lower quality. And so how as a business owner, should I be thinking there's a lot of change that needs to happen, but do I need to wait for that change? Are we at a point today where can I just go and do this on my own, even if if I don't need to send power over the wall? Maybe you can talk about there's a lot of change that needs to happen, but how should business leaders be thinking about deploying DERs today?
Well, I definitely think working with a lot of the trusted partners that are looking at deployment of clean energy projects and solutions, partnering with them to see what's possible today is absolutely the first best step. There's a lot that we can do today, both on the individual site level and different customers, whether you're a multifamily building apartment, whether you're a commercial industrial facility, whether you're a college campus or other sort of public entity. There's so many different technologies and solutions out there and available to you. And what's great is that there are a lot of different ways to make these projects pencil, both depending on the federal ITC and some of the new federal funding that's come down from the state or from the federal government and then from the state as well. So there's lots of different ways we can do some of these projects today. And then I think the other thing is getting engaged when you're asked to. There's a lot of power in the customer and end use, the customer voices and the end use energy consumer voice in some of these policy and regulatory matters, where a lot of folks like me who are engaging in these conversations on behalf of a lot of different clients and stakeholders, like if there's an opportunity for you to engage or make your voice heard, or someone asks you to join a meeting or call your assembly member or sign on to some sort of letter that's looking at advocating for changes to kind of these outdated rules and regulations, engaging in that front is really important and very valuable. The regulators and the government hear from folks like me all the time. That's my job as a policy professional, but they don't hear from customers as often as they really should and need to. And the customers are the ones that are saying, we're demanding change, we're facing barriers in developing our projects, or we think that our projects should be able to be developed in a more cost-effective basis on a much shorter timeline. All that translates into benefits for them, as well as, again, like changes that add up for like making things happen in the policy and regulatory world that could then have a much broader impact, both on a market level and then state and nationwide. So there's lots of ways to engage, but there's absolutely a lot of things we can do today. And so anyone that's seeking to do any sort of little clean energy project on like a small or a large scale basis, please reach out to folks like VECKTA, folks like myself. There's a lot of different groups that are out there looking to help proliferate clean energy projects in the various communities. And there's lots that we can do to like explore what your needs are and see what solutions are available today, as well as how you can get engaged and help influence and shape regulations for tomorrow.
Love that. What's exciting you most right now, Allie?
Oh, man. I'd say, man, if I had to recap all the above, like there's a lot of thorny policy and political challenges, like the Public Utilities Commission just voted to adopt a fixed charge recently that, would hamper a lot of the clean energy progress that we've made on a lot of these new projects. And so like there's a lot of thorny challenges like that, like some of the issues with microgrids and not being able to cross rights of way that are really entrenched. But I think like there's never been a time where I've seen more interest in microgrids and community energy solutions and more frustration with the status quo. This fixed charge issue is just kind of like the cherry on top of like, we've continued to have our rates be raised. We've continued to have subpar service. We've continued to see like just a lot of slow movement from the same old entities. So there's a lot of interest and I think a lot of pent up demand into these newer technologies and new solutions, which require us to be in a new regulatory paradigm that considers all of these challenges for the 21st century and really looks harder at the solutions and opportunities that are up ahead of us. So for me, I'm really excited to see like the political winds are turning. I've never seen more engaged customers. I've never seen more communities want to get involved in this space. And then like for energy nerds like myself, just see like a lot of the ideas that we've been kind of cooking for the last several years gain a lot of momentum and really gain a lot of support. So some of the bills on microgrids that I mentioned earlier had more than 300 supporters in their first policy committee. We had like hundreds of folks opposing this fixed charge. There's a lot of engagement that I've really not seen on this level. So I think we're in a really interesting time where I think there is a lot of opportunity for change. And at the same time, what we can do today has never been, there's never been more expansive opportunity than there has been in the past. So lots of good stuff ahead of us in the policy and regulatory world, and that really translates on the ground. So thanks to everyone that's really taken the lead to deploy a sustainable energy project, who's been considering this type of opportunity really in a new paradigm in the 21st century, and it's exciting.
So the flip of that question, why aren't these things happening faster?
Oh man, we need like armies of me, you, and Gareth to be involved in all of the different venues.
Yeah, I think it's the legacy system. One thing that's been on my mind as we've been having this conversation is the and maybe this is a bigger question. We could probably have a whole episode on this, but is the investor-owned utility, like investors and being the owners of the utility, is that really the right construct in the first place as well? Because all investors want is growth, and we're maybe incentivizing the wrong thing.
I'd say that's at the crux of this. I think the current regulatory model is not incentivizing the right thing. It's incentivizing large scale build out of, expensive poles and wires and climate vulnerable or risky infrastructure that was appropriate in the 20th century. Again, not to say that this model was never appropriate or never the right, the right approach, but given where we're at in the 21st century, we've got wildfires, we've got earthquakes, we've got, I mean, hell, what happened in Hawaii? Like, we just got so many different issues with climate change and adaptation needs that are so different, along with, again, like, we never considered the needs of environmental justice communities or those that are disadvantaged or disproportionately impacted. A lot of folks that could argue that we shouldn't be incentivizing the same model because it's been, impacting those that can least afford it the most. And so how do we incentivize the right thing? It's hard to wrest power and control from those that currently have it. And that's why changing the status quo is so hard, no matter what venue or industry or, atmosphere you're talking about. But I do think that we need to look at incentivizing different outcomes and different solutions. And I'd say if we're talking about profits and market opportunities, looking at some of these more targeted, like how do we develop a win-win outcome? Like looking at incentivizing customer and community solutions that benefit the utility, that benefit our larger energy system. So we get benefits both at the community level for resilience and for clean energy, but we also an optimization of like electrification appliances and transportation, et cetera. But then how does that translate up to a win-win for the system? And I think there's a there. It's just really hard to, those that are already enriched by the status quo don't want things to change. And those that have been hindered or hampered by the existing model are very motivated for change. And so I think that's the bridge of how we get a win-win for the middle is really our next step. But yeah, that's what I'm really excited about. But I would absolutely agree that what we have right now isn't working. And we do need to update it for the 21st century.
It makes me draw a parallel to the healthcare industry as well, as the healthcare industry has been shifting into this value-based care model, and kind of how healthy are your people, not how many people are you treating. And I think similar here, how often are you do you have outages, and how quickly can you help people interconnect systems? I think that's a really interesting parallel to draw, which is the performance-based model.
So absolutely. I mean, you could argue like none of this stuff should be a natural monopoly anymore in the 21st century. Maybe it was in the 20th, but we've got lots of different solutions, lots of different performance incentives and different metrics we can track and measure that we just didn't have, or like the technology and the data that we just didn't have access to that now allows us to create a new paradigm. We might not have had that 10, 20, 30 years ago, but now we do. And so we should definitely consider it. So I think the healthcare model is a good example. And also things like telecom, which I think have a lot of like parallels to the transition, right? Do we all think we should just be like chained to landline telephones in today's world? We can't even imagine that world today. But like 30, 40 years ago, we couldn't have imagined a world with cell phones where everything was decentralized and everything was based on a subscription, and that you did have to compete for customer businesses. So I think those are all really important things that, yeah, we could definitely dive into in the future, but are really important. The fundamentals are, we're going to allow for an entity to be the provider of last resort, to have an obligation to serve. A government grants a monopoly. There's a great power vested in that. And then there's also great responsibility. And those entities need to be delivering those benefits. And if they're not, we need to be looking towards other solutions and empowering those that are able to provide those solutions and bring them to bear. So I think that's what's really exciting about the future, is kind of this like, how do we provide that win-win value proposition and make this change such that we meet all these 21st century energy goals, but that like we're not leaving anyone behind. And also like, let's be real, we're not just getting rid of the legacy, investor-owned utility model tomorrow. But like, how do we create a win-win value proposition such that everyone gets a piece of the pie? And I think that's really one of the biggest fun challenges, I'd say, is upon me and my firm and a lot of the colleagues that I have. And like a part of the larger energy transition vision is, if we can figure out that puzzle piece, I think a lot of the other issues that we have about like, what clean energy regulations do we need to adopt? A lot of that kind of falls into place if we tackle one more of the systemic challenge, but no small feat, and why we need a team and a large coalition around it.
Couldn't agree more and love it. I think the work you're doing is changing the rules of the game, and I think that's key to success. And I think there's huge opportunity, isn't there? I think that's what's so exciting about this. This isn't This isn't a negative outcome. This is like, how do we unlock massive value and create access to power for all? Allie, we'll have you back for sure. You can be our resident policy expert and keep us up to date on what's moving and shaking. To help us close out, we finish with our power surge round. And if you could be any energy technology, what would it be and why?
That's a great one. Well, thanks, Gareth and Dan, for having me. It's been wonderful to be on the show, and thanks everyone for tuning in. If I could be any of the technologies, this is why I'm in microgrids. I'd be a microgrid, and it's because microgrids aren't one technology or one little widget and gadget. They are a system of all of them, and I like to think of us as being kind of a conduit for the public and the private sector, to the government, to the regulatory entities, and to the end-use customers and to the developers, all looking to make this happen. So being that conduit and that nexus point, microgrids are a system, and that's what I would be if I could be anything.
I think it's a very important one to have systems thinking in all of this. So building on that, what do you have any favorite books, resources, podcasts, newsletters that you'd recommend for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Man, there's so many good resources out there, so it's hard to pick one, but I'll just say for the deep energy nerds out there that are in for a book, The Grid by Gretchen Bach is a really good one for anyone that wants to understand like kind of the history of energy regulation, the system, and how the grid was built, and then kind of some of these thornier policy challenges that we have today, explaining kind of a lot more in depth than what I covered. That book is really awesome. I think California Burning by, I think it's Catherine Blunt, explains some of the political challenges and some of the thornier issues and the drama that was California the past couple of years that serves as a reminder for the rest of the country. And then the last one I'll say, for those of you that are really interested in some of the bigger picture energy politics and a different case study, my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, Dennis Kucinich used to be our mayor of Cleveland way back in the day. He wrote a book about his quest to save Cleveland Public Power, or Muni Light, called The Division of Power and Light. And it depicts a lot of the first energy and other like monopoly utility tricks of the trade and how they tried to obstruct public power back in the days. It's a really interesting read, kind of reads like a combo of like energy system meets like mobster mafia book. So definitely really good. And then, yeah, as always, like we have a lot of great trade publications out there. So your local trade press, anything with your coalition partners, especially, and supporting a lot of the stakeholders and trade organizations that are really out there fighting the good fight. So those are the ones that I'd recommend supporting and continuing to follow.
So good. Love it, Allie. Thank you. Last question. In the context of our global energy transition and future, in your life, you will have been successful when?
We upend this legacy system.
Great way to close it out. Allie, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for continuing to fight the good fight, build awareness, help educate our listeners. This has been a super great episode and excited to have you back.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Gareth and Dan. Wonderful to see everybody. And thanks for everybody for tuning in.
Thanks, Allie.
Dan, Allie's awesome, isn't she?
Woo, so much energy. I love it. Man, I think she's such an asset. So I'm so glad that we have people like her out there driving this forward, because it needs to change, and without voices like hers representing hundreds or thousands of other voices, it won't happen. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think a few big things for me. I think for business leaders out there and for our listeners, I think takeaway for me is there's never been a better opportunity to be planning for and investing in on-site energy systems and microgrids, particularly for your individual assets. You know, they already pencil today. The incentives are already there. And I think the incumbent business model that you'll touch on means that energy costs are only going to keep going up. Power outages are only going to get worse. And the utility isn't going to move quick enough to meet your sustainability target. So huge opportunity. But then with the work that Allie and her colleagues are doing, it's going to just unlock even more of a value stack for businesses in terms of being able to transact and monetize energy and resilience and carbon credits in the future. And so I think that is really exciting for me. And I think love the community resilience work she's doing. I was actually working on a project years ago up in Eugene, where the local water municipality put batteries and solar on a school to provide a community resilience hub for the community when winter ice storms came through and knocked out the power, so people could show up and have shelter, power, water, electricity. And I think that's going to become increasingly important, especially as we have heat waves, cold snaps, storms, hurricanes. And I think being able to build those community resilience opportunities at scale will be super exciting. What about you?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think without having people like Allie and her team really driving this, it just allows the utilities to continue to operate in their old ways, benefit from the status quo. I think I continue to reflect back on the fact that they are structurally built to continue to raise rates, like that they are an investor-owned utility. And just like any other stock, you think about the companies that any individual holds in their portfolio, whether it be Tesla or Microsoft, Google, or otherwise, you want them to grow. Like that's how stocks grow. And so in this case, the investor-owned utilities are driven by the capital markets to grow. And how do they grow? They deploy capital into transmission and distribution and big assets. And the bigger the dollar value, the more they can collect from a dollar perspective. Doesn't change their percentage, but 10% of $5 million is a lot less than 10% of $5 billion. And so if they've deployed $5 billion, great. And that just means they can raise the rates to us ratepayers, again, not customers, ratepayers. And so I think that we need to see this change. I like her stance on, we need to move the power sector, the utility sector into the 21st century and become more prosumers and allow them to have the constructs to still benefit. There's still a big role for them to play. But it's a different role for them to play. And I think that we're experiencing these pains right now of society is moving to a different paradigm and a different world, yet they are still stuck. And rightfully so. If I put myself in their shoes, they're benefiting off of the way that the policies are built. Yeah. And so why wouldn't they dig their heels in and continue to fight that until they're forced to change? So the quicker we can see them change, the better it will be. But the reality is there's so many other options that we don't have to rely on them as much as we had in the past. And so that's the exciting thing, the world that we're fighting in. And I look forward to more conversations with Allie.
Yeah, so good. And a big advocate of creating those win-win scenarios and making sure everyone is the beneficiary. So yeah, game on. Let's get it back and let's keep up to date on what's going on in policy world.
Sounds good.
All right,
thanks, guys.
Dan. We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.